رب من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر اللهم صل على محمد.
आवाज़ बुलंद सलवात। फिर भी सलवात। चाँद करबला के तूने तो देखे होंगे, उतरे थे इस ज़मीं पर अर्शे बरी के तारे। चाँद करबला के चांद जलवागर है हाशिम का चांद यहाँ पर, खैरात रोशनी की ले लीजियो यहाँ से। चांद जलवागर है हाशिम का चांद यहाँ पर, खैरात रोशनी की ले लीजियो यहाँ से। है चांद इस ज़मीं पर रखियो हमेशा ठंडक, सोते जो है यहाँ पर ज़हरा के हैं ये प्यारे। है चांद इस ज़मीं पर रखियो हमेशा ठंडक, सोते जो है यहाँ पर ज़हरा के हैं ये प्यारे। है चाँद तस्लीम सलसबीलों को सर के हैं ये मालिक, मारे गए जो प्यासे इस नहर के किनारे। तस्लीम सलसबीलों को सर के हैं ये मालिक, मारे गए जो प्यासे इस नहर के किनारे। है चाँद हुर और हबीब जैसे जाबाज और अहिब्बा मारे गए यहीं पर अंसार शाहिदी के। हुर और हबीब जैसे जाबाज और अहिब्बा मारे गए यहीं पर अंसार शाहिदी के। है चाँद मारे गए यहीं पर बेदर्दियों सितम से, ज़ैनब के दोनों प्यारे मुस्लिम के दोनों बेटे मारे गए यहीं पर बेदर्दियों सितम से, ज़ैनब के दोनों प्यारे, मुस्लिम के दोनों बेटे, ऐ चाँद इस सरज़मीं पे गुज़रा, सरवर पे ये भी सदमा, सीने पे खाई बरछी, हम शक्ल मुस्तफा ने। इस सरज़मीं पे गुज़रा, सरवर पे ये भी सदमा, सीने पे खाई बरछी, हम शक्ल मुस्तफा ने। ऐ चाँद करबला के, तूने तो देखे होंगे, उतरे थे इस ज़मीं पर अर्शे बरी के तारे, ऐ चाँद करबला के। आवाज़ बुलंद सलवात।
हुसैन से थे बगौर, सुन ले ज़माना हुसैन फना को बनाया हुसैन से थे मगौर, सुन ले ज़माना। छुरी के नीचे वो खाले से प्यार की बातें, छुरी के नीचे वो खाले से प्यार की बातें, अजल को हो गया सकता हुसैन से थे मगौर, सुन ले ज़माना हुसैन से थे। मुखालफत पे ज़माना था उस तरफ, लेकिन मुखालफत पे ज़माना था उस तरफ, लेकिन वही किया जो कहा था हुसैन से थे मगौर, सुन ले ज़माना। और सुबह शाम शुजाअत का लोहा मान गई सिपाही शाम शुजाअत का लोहा मान गई दबे न लाखों से तन्हा हुसैन ऐसे थे बगौर सुन ले ज़माना और कमर को बांध के पीरी में जलती रेती से कमर को बांध के पीरी में जलती रेती से उठाया बेटे का लाशा हुसैन ऐसे थे बगौर सुन ले ज़माना और जवान की लाशें उठाई बनाई कब्र सगीर जवान की लाशें उठाई बनाई कब्र सगीर कहीं भी अज़्म न बदला हुसैन ऐसे थे बगौर सुन ले ज़माना और हजार शुक्र के सजदे शहीद करता है हजार शुक्र के सजदे शहीद करता है बनाया कतरे को दरिया हुसैन ऐसे थे बगौर सुन ले ज़माना
बर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु Assalamu alaikum mu'mineen. We're again honored this year to have Maulana Mahdi Qazwini amongst us. You may remember he was here 2 years ago and said a couple of majalis for a weekend, but this time we're fortunate to have him for the whole Ashra, inshallah, till Soyam. So we welcome him again to the community, and I'd request him to please grace the member and deliver his speech. Burma. Allahumma salli ala. दीगर सलवात
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أتل ما أوحي إليك من الكتاب وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما صدق الله العلي العظيم وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In the years, months, and weeks that led up to the event of Ashura, the statements of Imam Hussein alayhi salam regarding the matter became a powerfully revealing factor. In fact, there were premonitions going back many decades to what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said about the matter. In one narration, it is said that Salama, the honorable wife of the Prophet, was asked by the Prophet one day when he retreated to his private chambers. The Prophet requested from her one day when he retreated into his private chambers that no one enter upon him, and that if anyone were to approach, that she would politely decline. And so Salama says that I was standing there, and all of a sudden Hussein approached, and at this time he was a toddler, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And she says, I could not bear myself to prevent him from going in. So she says, I took him, I held him in the same way that you would pick up a child and distract them from what they want to do. She says, I held him in my lap until after a while he became restless and he began to cry because he wanted to go inside and see his grandfather. She says, so, I let him go and he went inside. She says, then I heard weeping from the Prophet. I heard an expression of grief. And so I came in to see, is everything okay? Did something happen? So she asks the Prophet, and the Prophet turns to her. He says, Salama, Jibreel has just come to me, and he has revealed to me the following. He said to me, Inna ummataka sataqtuluhu min ba'dik. That your ummah, or people who claim to be a part of your ummah, they will kill him after you. They will wait until after you to perpetrate the crime. And so there were premonitions during the time of the Prophet, and as time passed, it became a little bit more clear what would eventually happen and what would inevitably happen. The signs were there during the time of the Khilafah of his father, Amir al-Mu'mineen, during the time of the Khilafah of Imam al-Hasan al-Mushtaba alayhi salam. And as the power transferred from Muawiyah to Yazid, it became very clear. So much so that Abdullah ibn Abbas, who was a cousin of the Prophet and of Amir al-Mu'mineen, who was a well-respected companion, a well-respected family member, a well-respected scholar, he says that we had no doubt that Hussein would be killed eventually. Something would happen and he would be killed. And so Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he knew what his cause was. He knew what his mission was. And he knew why he was doing what he was doing. And he made that clear on a number of occasions. In one occasion, which is cited the most, he writes a letter, or he leaves behind a letter or a will to his brother, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah was his half-brother. He was the son of Amir al-Mu'mineen, but his mother, Muhammad's mother, was not Fatima al-Zahra. He was born of another lady known as al-Hanafiyyah, so he was known as Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. And in that he says his famous statement, إِنِّي لَمْ أَخْرُجْ أَشِرًا وَلَا بَطِنًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا وَلَا مُفْسِدًا إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. That I did not rise as an oppressor, I did not rise as in vain. I did not rise so that I take someone's place politically, or to fight, or to create disturbance or disruption. إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ. I am here for Islah. And the word Islah translates to reform in the Arabic language. So it was clear, and that's why when it happened, It was a shock, yes, but it wasn't very surprising. There's a difference. It was a shock because, I mean, this is the grandson of the Prophet. This is the man who only 60 years earlier, the Prophet was holding and caressing and kissing on his neck and kissing on his head and kissing every part of his body. Only 60 years. Not 200, not 400, not 1,000. 60 years. It was a shock, but it wasn't very surprising. The Imam himself knew, the Prophet had premonitions, Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam al-Hassan, they all in one way or another, they conveyed that meaning that whatever is going on right now, it's not going to end pretty. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the way he inspired people is that he stated what his dream was. He stated what his mission was. See, and there's a very powerful psychological factor behind that. See, whenever you look at a task, whenever you look at a job, there's a why behind it, there's a purpose, and then there's a how and the what. And the way us as human beings, the way our brains operate is normally that we feel a certain way and we think a certain way about something. So if I have a job, if I have a task at hand, there's a certain way that I feel about it emotionally, and there's a certain way I intellectualize it rationally. And usually what happens in our thinking process is that there's a combination of both. Things have to make sense, but emotionally you also feel a certain way. And so Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he didn't necessarily talk about what his plan was. He talked about what his mission and what his dream was. But he didn't go to his companions and tell them 10 years earlier, by the way, we're going to end up in Karbala. It kind of just happened. If you look at the narrative, the Imam was in Medina, and by necessity he had to leave Medina and go to Mecca. And then by necessity he had to leave Mecca and go towards Kufa. His intended destination was Kufa, but eventually we know that that did not happen. He ended up where? In Karbala. So even when he ended up in Karbala, some narrations say that, towards the end, he told the enemy, he told the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, he said, look, if you have a personal vendetta with me, if you're afraid that I'm going to influence people to a different path and stray them away from the path that Yazid and Ubaidullah have determined, then let me go. Let me go. Some narrations say that, he requested to go further east towards the Indian subcontinent. Some people ask the question, they say, well, why did Imam Hussein stay in Karbala? Well, the counter question to that is, where was he supposed to go? He couldn't stay in Mecca. He could not stay in Medina. There were death threats there. Where was he supposed to go? He couldn't go to Sham. He would be going into the hornet's nest. He tried to go to Kufa, and that didn't happen, so he ended up in Karbala, and nowhere else were there people that were willing to support, except some narration said that there were people that were in the Indian subcontinent that were willing to support, and they said, no, you can't go there. But he made his why very, very clear. He made his mission very, very clear. And what I want to share with you is a concept that some of you have probably heard this. It's called the golden circle. And they teach this sometimes in organizational leadership. They say that when you want to persuade someone to do something, you could do it either in a positive sense or in a negative sense. You can either inspire someone or you can manipulate someone. Sometimes the goal is the same, but the question is, how do you want to live your life? When you have a goal and when you have a mission, say you have a goal for your family, do you want to carry out that goal through inspiration, or do you want to carry it out through manipulation and intimidation? I'll give you an example. If a father has a successful business or a successful practice that he's running, and he tells his sons, now he wants to influence his sons and his daughters to carry on the family business so that it outlives him. He can either inspire them and lead by example, bring them in, show them what to do, reward them when they're doing good, encourage them, maybe adjust teach them how to adjust if they're not doing things properly. And he tells them, look, come on board with me, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to live very long. And one day, all of this is going to belong to you. And I want to pass on my world to you. Or he could do the opposite. He can say that, look, if you don't work with me, we're going to be in big, big financial trouble. And you're not going to get my business. You're not going to get to inherit any of my business. Now, the son might be persuaded and influenced, but he's not inspired. It's out of fear and out of intimidation. So there's ways to get people to do things. And so what this concept talks about, the golden circle, the reason why it's called the golden circle is because it's considered sort of an organizational leadership philosophy, kind of like a revelation of how to sell to someone or how to get someone to follow a certain mission. And if you can imagine the following, if you can imagine drawing on a board 3 concentric circles, so you have one circle in the middle and then 2 circles that are outside. The golden circle, in the middle, there's the why, and in the outside, there's the how and the what. And the whole thesis of this argument is that if you really want to inspire someone to do something, then instead of only focusing on the how and the what, you'll focus on the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Because if you can focus on the why, then you can inspire more people than just talk about the how and the what. And there's a book that was written on this, and one of the great examples that's mentioned in that book is the example of Martin Luther King Jr., who today is, as time goes on, he's celebrated more and more around the world. Especially with what has been going on in the past few years here in the United States in terms of racial discrimination and whatnot. His ideas are being celebrated more and more every single day. And what the author of this book says is that, look, if you look at Martin Luther King, he wasn't the best orator of his time. He wasn't the best speaker of his time. There were people that can speak better than he could. There were people that were more talented in their delivery than him. He's not the only person that promoted social justice. During the civil rights era, there were many people that came out and promoted social justice. But he was a cut above, and he was celebrated in a different fashion. And he says that, the author, he says that, notice Martin Luther King, he had what was his speech called? I have a dream, not I have a plan. He says if I talked about a plan, nobody's going to follow you. He says the reason why people lose interest in politicians is because the politician talks about the plan, and that's boring. Nobody wants to hear about a plan, but everybody wants to hear about a dream. And sometimes, even if the dream is, even if you have the wrong intentions behind the dream, look at United States politics and how people vote. When a president decides to run, one of the most important, critical parts of the campaign is the slogan, the banner, those two words, or those 3 words, or those 4 words that make people believe, that inspire, even if it's empty, even if there's no how or what, or the how or what is something completely illegitimate or it's completely unrealistic. But because they focus on a why, they're able to inspire. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam, the reason why we commemorate him year after year wasn't simply because he journeyed from one place or another. I mean, many people, before and after, came and they were oppressed politically for whatever reason. But Imam Hussein alayhi salam moved and inspired people because he talked about a why, and because he was not willing to back down. He was not willing to compromise. And he had many chances at that. It was as easy, when he was in Medina, it was as easy as a handshake. All he had to do was shake a hand. He could have lived like a king. The treasury would have been open to him. He could have done that in Medina. He could have done that in Mecca. He had chances, even until, narrations tell us, even until the last few days, even until the last few moments to give in. But he had a very, very strong and powerful why. And that's why his message is so important. Number one, it's because it's not about intellectualization. It's not intellectually what he did, but it's emotionally what he did. Like I said before, that usually when we're involved in something or when we follow something, there's 2 parts of our brain that's involved. And some authors have written about this, how we have a thinking brain, an intellectual brain, but we also have an emotional brain. And the ones that describe the theory of evolution say that when you look at the human being and how we evolved over whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years, whatever it is that we first had an emotional mind and an emotional brain before we had an intellectual brain. They say that the lower part of the brain existed before the upper part of the brain. The lower part of the brain, which houses what? The amygdala, the hippocampus, all of the centers of emotion that we have, where we feel anger, where we feel rage, where we feel passion, where we feel lust, where we feel all of those core emotions, that comes from the lower part of our brain. The upper part of our brain, which is what? The prefrontal cortex, that's where you develop social skills. That's where you intellectualize. That's where you have working memory. That's how you're able to calculate certain things. In the 20th century, in the world of world of psychiatry, one of the and some of you have probably read this if you've studied in med school or maybe even psychology or psychiatry, that one of the practices that had become popular among the time to alleviate certain symptoms associated in the world of psychiatry was the lobotomy. And what would they do with the lobotomy? They would go in and they would sever some of the neurons and the connectors in the prefrontal cortex, right? And it would do the job. However, it had repercussions. People lost their ability to socialize. They lost all social skill because that was the center right there. So our ability to think, our ability to intellectualize, our ability to make sense, all that comes from the upper part of the brain, the front of the brain. But the lower part of the brain, the limbic system, where you have the amygdala, that's where our emotions come from. And so Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his why represents that passion. That's why it's a somber event. Ashura is a somber event. That's why we weep. That's why it's not something intellectual that we think about. There has to be an emotional attachment. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So one of the statements of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we said that Imam Hussein made many statements in those years following and the months following and the weeks following that led to Ashura. One of his statements was the following. It's a very, very powerful sentence. He says the following in describing man, in describing human beings. He said, "Inna an-nasa 'abidu ad-dunya wad-dinu la'iqun 'ala alsinatihim." He says that people, nas, generally speaking, they are slaves of this world. They are the abid of this dunya. They follow whatever is new in this dunya, whatever is part of this dunya. You know, keeping up with the Jonases. Thinking about materials only. Thinking about what you can buy with your money or what you can borrow to buy with your money. That's the popular thing. وَالدِّينُ لَعِقٌ عَلَىٰ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. He says when it comes to faith and when it comes to religion, it's just, for many people, it's just a flapping of the tongue. It's a flapping of the mouth. It's just something that they say. And he goes on to describe, he says that as long as they're getting what they want, they're okay. But then he says, on the contrary, فَإِذَا مُحِّصُوا بِالْبَلَاءِ, if they were to experience bala, which is calamity, trials and tribulations, قَلَّ الدَّيَّانُونَ. He says that at that moment, you see the numbers of the righteous begin to dwindle. Because religion, for most people, is just something that they mention on their tongues. It's just the flapping of the tongue or the flapping of the mouth. And what he was speaking about here was really the self-serving nature of man. Think about it. Whenever we do something, we expect a reward. You know, they do tests with primates and with different animals that the way that they're able to carry out some of those tests is by providing a reward, providing a monkey for the banana, a banana for the monkey. And so, as human beings, we kind of develop that nature where we're constantly expecting something in return. So if I do good, I'm expecting something in return. And generally, we have a very, very weak, what I like to call a very weak faith muscle. Our faith muscles aren't very weak. And that will put some effort for a day, for 2 weeks, for a month, for 6 months, for a year, sometimes for 2 years. And if we don't get that reward right away, we give up. Imam Hussein alayhi salam talks about that nature, and the reason he spoke about that nature and described it is because he was describing people that were around him. Look at the case of Muslim ibn Aqil. When he enters Kufa, he has thousands of people. But because people realize that really there's not going to be any true reward, in fact, the opposite is true, they begin to abandon him. By the time narrations tell us that by the time he finishes leading the prayer and he leaves, there's nobody. Nobody with him. He's completely abandoned. فَإِذَا مُحِّصُوا بِالْبَلَاءِ قَلَّ الدَّيَانُونَ. As soon as there is calamity, as soon as there is trial, as soon as there is tribulation, the people of faith, or people who, it's interesting because the word that he uses are dayanun, not mu'minun. Mu'minun are people of true faith. He says dayanun. Dayanun, it's when you hear in the Arabic language mutadayyin. It's a person who is of religion. He is of religion, meaning he practices religion. But his faith is not solid. It's not sound. What happens? They go up against opposition. They go up against tribulations. They go up against trials. And the numbers automatically begin to dwindle because we have a weak faith muscle. However, because Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and going back to his plan, because what he believed in was so powerful, it didn't matter what the circumstances were. Had it been in Medina, had it been in Mecca, had it been in Kufa, had it been in Karbala, it didn't matter. Because he knew what was going on, and he could really visualize what was happening. You know, so many of these narrations, they describe the Imam and the companions of the Imam being able to visualize what was taking place, even on the battlefield. You know, there's a great story that's narrated, and some of you have probably know this story. It's the story of a man by the name of Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was a psychologist, or rather he was a psychotherapist, and he was also a Holocaust survivor. And when he came out of the Holocaust, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Some of you have probably heard of this book. If not, definitely get the book. It's a very, very short read, but it's a very, very powerful and impactful read. And Man's Search for Meaning is based on his observations when he was in the concentration camp. And what's so powerful about this book is he talks about how he actually survived. You know, he says that when we first arrived, we were automatically divided into groups. One group went directly to the extermination camp, and for the people that can perform labor and perform work, we were taken to another camp. So he was taken to a labor camp. And he says that, you know, all things being equal, the way that I was able to survive versus how other people failed was I was able to visualize my future. He says, and he describes some of the dire situations that people went through. When they would work, they were not paid. First of all, they had to work outside. Sometimes it was in freezing weather with minimal clothing, and sometimes it was 12 hours straight. And they weren't given any food. Instead, they were rewarded with cigarettes. And so what a prisoner could do was take the cigarettes and trade the cigarettes for food. And he says that often, in those harsh conditions, the only thing that you could survive on was the very little food that was provided to you. But in order to get that food, you had to trade it for cigarettes, and in order to get the cigarettes, you had to work very, very hard. So imagine the faith and the mental strength that it takes to work out in the cold for 12 hours. And when he talks about humiliation, he says it wasn't the physical abuse, it was a psychological abuse. He says when a guard would walk up to you and he would hit you with the butt of his gun in the head, he says psychologically and emotionally that hurt more than it actually hurt physically. He says because we got to a point where physically the situation was so dire that you couldn't really inflict more physical pain on us, is what he was saying. He says everything from there was just psychological pain. So you had to do that, get the cigarettes, and then decide to trade the cigarettes for food, and that's how you survived. He says one way that I knew that people gave up is when they smoked the cigarettes. Because he knew that at that moment, smoking, to that person, smoking was more important than food. When food was the only thing that allowed you to survive. He says that in those dire situations, the way that I survived was that even though I was in that situation, I visualized something different. I imagined something different. my why, my purpose. And that's why he calls the book Man's Search for Meaning. The purpose that I had and the meaning that I had and the will to live, that's his whole thesis, is the will to live. He says, the will to live with me was so strong that no matter what the situation was, I could survive. He says, I imagine myself, because he was a psychotherapist and he was a university professor, he says, I imagine myself in the future. I was standing in a well-lit university classroom. And there were upholstered seats in front of me, and my students were sitting in front of me. And I was describing to them how I survived the Holocaust. So he had to imagine himself in the future talking about the past when he was really in the present of it all. Not knowing that one day or any day he could be called out and taken to the extermination camp. That was another added factor. He says, I would imagine myself, I would visualize myself walking up the steps to my apartment. I would put the key inside the lock. I would turn it. I would turn the knob. I would enter. I would turn on the lights, and I would find my wife there waiting for me. Even though his wife was not with him in the camp, and he had no idea what was going on because they were just separated without explanation. He says, what gave me will and the way that I exercised my will to live was by visualization. I could visualize. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he had that power of visualization. He knew what was waiting at the end. See, when you have a strong purpose, you know what you're doing. The reason I bring this up, why is it so important that I bring this up? Is because I find that sometimes when I speak to young people and I ask them why they do what they're doing, why they're taking a career choice, most of the time the career choice is what? I know in some communities, and I'm part of the community, so I can criticize the community very freely. It's as if when you're born, there's a stamp. It says IT, doctor, engineer. And if you're a lucky lawyer, that's being very, very risky. You get to be a lawyer. And there's nothing else outside of that. And so for a lot of people, it's funny, we laugh, but for a lot of people, I ask them, why do you do what you do? To make my parents happy. And that's the response. And is that the way that you want to live your life? Now, it's very, very important to make our parents happy and to honor our parents. I'm not saying go and just, I know it's the beginning of the school year, tear your books. No, go get your, do good this semester, do good next semester, graduate, get your education. Education is very important. What I'm saying is, even if you plan to continue to do what you do, find a purpose and a mission and a meaning that's beyond just making my parents happy. Find something that you can attach yourself so that one day, if you have moody parents and they're not happy, you can continue to do what you do. So I say this because, we used to hear about the midlife crisis before. Someone gets to the age of 40, and that was considered midlife because people were living roughly around 80 years. Now, purpose, find a passion, find a why, find an emotional drive. Find something that makes you tick. Because as a human being, you're not just motivated by the how and the what. You're motivated by the why. That's where our raw emotion, that's what helps us keep on going. See, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, one of his messages was don't give up so easily. Don't quit. Just because you saw some opposition, don't quit. Our children, we teach them in school that because, we have this grading system, you can either get an A, B, C, D, or an F. I was about to say E, but an F, that if you get an F and you fail, that's it. That's the end. There's nothing. And we need to get rid of that mindset. We can't think about failure in that way anymore. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam says, don't give up on yourself. Maybe you've had a setback in a relationship. Maybe you've had a setback in a career. Maybe you've had a setback with your finances. Don't give up so easily. I mean, if Imam Hussein was to give up because of setbacks, how many setbacks did he have just on the day of Ashura? How many setbacks did he have in Medina? How many setbacks did he have in Mecca? There's stories of people entering Medina, finding Imam Hussein and cursing at him. Just because they were brainwashed. They were taught that Ali and his family are evil. How many setbacks did he have? He didn't give up. There's a story that I read in a book one time. It's very interesting, and it takes place during the gold rush. During the gold rush, where most people moved from east or the Midwest towards the West Coast, and people wanted to get rich, and they wanted to get rich quick. There's a gentleman who was in Virginia or West Virginia, somewhere around there, that moved somewhere somewhere in the Midwest or the West, with his uncle. And he narrates the story. He says, so we left everything behind. We left our family. We left our businesses. We left our livelihood. We went through territory, and a lot of these people didn't make it because they were venturing through territory, and they didn't have the roads and the interstate highways and all of that. You know, they were prone to sickness. They were prone to disease. They were prone to all sorts of dangers. And so he says, we got to the place that we wanted to start digging for gold. We got an engineer, we got experts, we bought all the equipment, we invested all of this money because we wanted to strike it rich. And so the engineer said, you know, this is a perfect place to dig. So he said, we started digging. And we were digging, and we were digging, and it's a messy, messy job. You know, you're dealing with tons of dirt that you have to sift through and all this stuff, and your plans don't go in the way that you want, and you can't do it, you know, 24/7 because you can't do it at night. You have to work in the day, and it's manual labor. It's tough. He says, until finally we gave up. We just quit. And we were so fed up that we sold everything that we had right there on the spot. We sold the plans, we sold the plot of earth, we sold the equipment, all of that. We just gave it up and we went back. True story, the person that came in, he consulted an engineer. He brought in another person. So the engineer says, you're digging in the hole, but just dig a little bit in this direction. They dug, and 3 feet later, they found gold. 3 feet. And so you can imagine this guy, when he heard the story, that everything that you gave up, you invested all this time and this energy and this passion and this commitment, and you gave up and you were only 3 feet away from gold. There's a book written about it called 3 Feet Away from Gold. Now, what did the man do? He was upset, but he took it as a lesson. He allowed it to actually bring him, to strengthen his faith rather than to deteriorate his faith. So he went into insurance sales, and he became very, very successful. And he attributes his success to the story. He said that every time I wanted to quit, I wanted to make a sale and someone turned me down, or I didn't get the sale that I wanted, I would think I'm 3 feet away from gold. I'm 3 feet away from gold. I'm 3 feet away from gold. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam teaches us, he says, don't give up just because you have some opposition. الناس عبيد الدنيا والدين لاعق على ألسنتهم. He says the nature of people is that they are slaves of this world, and that religion is nothing but a flapping of the tongue. It's a flapping of the mouth. And once most people, they face oppression, they give up what they have because their why is not strong enough. And when your why is not strong enough, your commitment is not strong enough. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So many of these ironies that Imam Hussein alayhi salam noticed were conveyed in his words. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam was, when Muawiyah decided to appoint Yazid, his son, as his successor, Yazid sent word to Al-Walid, who was the governor of Medina at the time. He said, summon the most important people of Medina and ask them to pledge allegiance to me. So they summoned, it's said that they summoned Abdullah ibn Umar and Abdullah ibn Abbas. Another person was Abdullah ibn Zubayr and Imam Hussein. Those were the 4 most important people. Abdullah ibn Zubayr left. He said, I'm not going to pledge allegiance to Yazid, and he went to Mecca, and he actually took over Mecca, and he became the Emir of Mecca, and he led a revolt which was unsuccessful. It's said that Abdullah ibn Abbas was either out of town, and Abdullah ibn Umar he didn't know whether to pledge allegiance or not pledge allegiance, so he found an excuse to get out of it. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, however, went to the palace of Al-Walid, but he brought with him the men of Banu Hashim, and he stood them by the door. He brought with him Ali al-Akbar, al-Abbas, the brave men of Banu Hashim. He says, I want you to stand by the door. If you hear me calling out for help, know that I'm in danger and come in and rescue me. But as long as you don't hear my call for distress, stay where you are, stay put. And so he comes in, they summon him, and Al-Walid tells him the story. He says that, and by Al-Walid is Marwan ibn al-Hakam, who eventually becomes one of the Umayyad caliphs down the road. He says to him, this is what Yazid has ordered us, and he's ordered us that either you accept or you're going to have to, it's either the carrot or the stick. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he turns to him. And this is where principles and values are important. He says to him, I will not. Never. And then he describes Yazid. He says, Inna Yazidan rajulun fasiqun fajir, sharabun lil-khumur, rakibun lil-fujur, qatilun lil-nafs al-muhtarama, wa mithli la yubayi'u mithlah. He says, Yazid is a womanizer, he's a coward, he's licentious, he's deviant, he's a drunkard, he doesn't respect the sanctity of life, and you expect a man like me to shake hands with a man like him? Does this make sense at all? Are you able to make any sense out of this? And Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he refuses and he departs. But before he departs, brothers and sisters, he visits the grave of his grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He knows this is the final wida'. He knows this is the final farewell. And he sits at the grave of Rasulullah. He sits at the grave of Fatima Zahra. He sits at the grave of his brother Al-Hasan. Now he is alone. Now he is the last member of Ahlul Kisat. He is the last surviving member of that holy household. And he knows what his mission is going to look like. So he has a conversation with Rasulullah. He has a conversation with his mother Fatima. He begins to speak to them. All of a sudden, the narration says that he falls asleep. And as he is asleep, he sees Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in his dream. Rasulullah comes to him. He says, Bunayya, my dear son. He says, know one thing. Anta rahilun ilayna ajila. He says, you are approaching us very quickly. He says, don't worry. He says, whatever is going to come into your path, you are approaching us. You are in the right direction. Why? Because you are coming back to us. Finally, you are coming back. أَنْتَ رَاحِلٌ إِلَيْنَا عَاجِلًا. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when he gets up, he wakes up after seeing the dream. He realizes exactly, now he is sure, he knows exactly what his mission is. So he begins to gather his family members, Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, Ali al-Akbar, Zainab alayhi salam, the sons, the nephews, the daughters, everybody who had the strength. Many people did not have the strength. During those days, it was an arduous journey. And this was before the Hajj season. Imam Hussein, after the month of Ramadan in Sha'ban, he decided to leave. And to leave towards Mecca so that he is there for a few months and he can perform the Hajj. However, many of the people that were there, they were not able to go. One of them, it's narrated that her name was Fatima Sughra. She was the young daughter of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. She was too sick to leave. She was too sick to partake in the journey, so Imam Hussein left her in the protection of Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah and of al-Banin, who also stayed behind. And so narrations tell us that as Imam Hussein alayhi salam, as he boarded the caravan and as he began to go, Fatima Sughra turned to him. She says, my father, my dear father, I know that you're leaving and I understand that I am too sick to leave now. I understand that this is tolling and this might be too much for me, but I have one request. He says, what is it, my dear? She says to him, leave behind my little brother, Ali al-Asghar. She says, I want someone that is going to remind me of you. He turns to her, my darling Fatima, how can I leave behind with you a 6-month-old? He has to be with his mother. She says, then leave behind something for me. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he tells her, my dear, I promise you that this will happen. I promise you that one day we will be reunited. How it will happen, who knows? But I promise you that one day we will be reunited. Narrations tell us that after that day when Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, when Sayyidah Zainab, when they came back to Medina, when Fatima Sughra came out, she saw that the caravan that left was not the same as the caravan that is coming back. Where is her father Hussein? Where is her uncle al-Abbas? Where is her dear brother Ali al-Asghar? Narrations tell us that as soon as she saw that it was empty, his crib was empty, she ran back into the house. She went to the crib where Ali al-Asghar used to sleep and she began to rock the crib and recite poetry. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un wa saya'lamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalabin yanqalibun والعاقبة للمتقين وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
हुसैन का है, करबला में रोज़ा हुसैन का है, हर ज़माना